I'm Luke Lysen, and this is my podcast.
Last night you said something I hadn't heard you ever say before, and I was wondering if you'd share that again. We were talking, and you mentioned the first time you ever saw a Cirrus, out in the wild that you had created. What was that like?
Actually, as we talked about it last night, I think the analogy came up correct when you hear or see about a band, they hear their song on the radio for the first time. It is very much the same. We were producing some airplanes. They were rolling out. It was probably 2099. We delivered our first airplane.
Walt Conley, right?
Walt Conley, yeah. The end of July of 1999. And it was probably mid-2000. We had 70, 80 airplanes out and landed at an airport, and there's an airplane. And that's back in the day when there were so few, we actually knew who
you knew all the owners, right?
Was, like, oh yeah, I remember building his airplane. And it's exciting. And over time, not to sound arrogant with it, now you land at an airport, and if there's not a Cirrus, it's like, what's wrong with this airport?
Well, we were talking about it. Last summer I was at the VPO event in Croatia and driving in a random field in the middle of Croatia, and there's a Cirrus on the ramp. I mean, we're closing in on probably 10,500. They are ubiquitous. They are the airplane. So that sort of goes back to how did aviation become your passion? When was it that you knew that this was going to be your life?
I don't remember when I knew that.
Before you could remember.
So the company started with my brother Alan and I and his roommate from college, Jeff Viken. Alan is older and always had that passion. So almost from as early as I can remember, we're playing with model airplanes and talking about aviation. Through high school, Alan is talking about he's going to have an airplane company. He's going to design airplanes. It was so natural, part of the conversation. At some point, it's like, well, of course we're going to do that.
But entrepreneurship had been in your family, right? Your parents were entrepreneurs, your uncle had a boat company.
Yeah, my grandfather kind of started the aviation bit with the family. He developed pasteurizing equipment, or I should say dairy equipment.
Okay.
Up in central Minnesota. And he had an airplane, I think his first airplane was in the 1930s.
Okay.
And he had a pilot. He was not a pilot. But with an airplane and a pilot, he would land in the hayfields next to dairies and go in and sell his equipment or go in and work on it or fix it.
Okay.
So from the early days of his business, flying to a job, he learned quickly you could beat the competition there. You can get there sooner, better support.
So you just grew up knowing this. This is just part of is this Tuesday to have an airplane around?
Yes and no. The enthusiasm, the drive for aviation was there. My uncle was a pilot from the time that he was 16 years old, my dad's brother. My parents were not pilots when I was very young. It was actually, again, Alan, who wanted to learn to fly, that my parents said they wouldn't let us fly until they learned.
Okay.
So my parents and Alan went through ground school together. Is that a problem that?
It's not too bad.
Okay. So Alan and my parents went to ground school together, and both my parents got their pilot's license.
Okay.
Then Alan got his pilot's license. He was in high school when he started to fly. I was in middle school when we bought our first airplane, 1960 182.
Okay.
So from that point on, lots of travels in the backseat of a Cessna. When I turned 15, when I could now start to learn to fly, Alan and I went out and bought a Cessna 140, 1947 Cessna 140. That's what I learned to fly on. We kept it in a teeny little grass strip. You know, I actually describe it as a hayfield. It's not much more than a hayfield.
Okay.
On a farm about, I don't know, 7-8 miles north of the town that I grew up in. And that's where I learned to fly, flying that Cessna 140.
Okay.
The enthusiasm for flying was always there, and I loved flying. I wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to be involved in aviation. I was not as steadfast what that is as Alan was. He was drawing pictures of airplanes saying, this is what we're going to go design. I was going, yeah, I want to go fly anything.
All right.
Just before graduating from high school, I was on a camping trip in northern Wisconsin. You know, in those days, you drive someplace, you always got to drive by the airport and see if there's anything cool.
Sure.
And drove into this little airport, and there's a Champ that was sitting, laying upside down, still in the tie down, but it's wings down, gear up. Like any normal kid then, I looked at that and go, wow, that's cool. That could be we could rebuild that.
Sure, that's normal.
And asked the people at the FBO where, you know, who owns the airplane and what's the story. You know, it got flipped in a storm. The owners are, you know, a mile away. They gave me the address. I drive down there, knock on the door. A woman comes to the door, ask about the airplane, and said, you know, I might be interested in buying it. And I don't know if she was the sole owner, but she agreed like that fast. You can have it. We worked out a price. It was every cent that Alan and I had together to go buy this wrecked Champ.
Okay.
And I should say damaged. I mean, it was just flipped over, so we thought it was going to be an easy project.
Like everything in aviation.
Yep. So we send every penny we have up to this couple in Wisconsin, and now we're trying to figure out, first of all, how do we go up there and get it, take it apart, trailer it back without making it worse. And of course, we hadn't told our parents yet that we were buying another airplane.
So just to be clear, at this point, this is a 3 airplane household now?
This is about to be a 3 airplane, or maybe a 2.5
2.5
household. Alan and I, we were at home, parents come home, and you know, you hear this, boys, you know, come into the kitchen, sit down. And literally, we looked at each other and go, what'd you do? I don't know. What'd you do? I don't know. You know? But you know you're in trouble, and we don't know why we're in trouble yet. And we went up to the kitchen, and of course my parents know the banker. The banker didn't seem that this was normal, that 2 kids send all their money to somebody in Wisconsin, and proceeded to tell my parents that we had done that.
Sure.
So it was like, yeah, we bought an airplane. It's wrecked. It's in Wisconsin. Can we borrow the car and the trailer to go get it now?
Right.
So, of course, they were extremely supportive of our aviation enthusiasm and maybe aviation craziness.
Well, that seems to be a theme, though, from that point moving forward, right? I mean, your parents supporting you with the barn and just helping you guys get started.
Yes, very much so. We brought the Champ back. We start rebuilding the Champ. In that process, that's where I became 100% in line with Alan's vision of we're going to go build airplanes.
And you're 15 at this point now.
Oh no, I graduated from high school.
Okay,
so I was 17
17
when we actually started working on that airplane.
Okay.
Then I was like, yeah, I like building airplanes. I like working on this stuff. So through that process, it's like, yeah, let's go start a company. You know, we weren't completely sure what it would be. The name Cirrus often comes up. Where'd the name come from?
Yeah.
We were driving down to my grandparents in Chicago from southern Wisconsin driving down there. And it was a day that we called flight service, and they said, there's no way you could make this flight VFR. It's going to be horrible weather, thunderstorms everywhere, rain, wind, the sky is falling, you have to drive. We drove down to Chicago and back that day, and the only cloud we saw the whole day was a cirrus cloud.
Yeah, a little bit before flight.
And that's when, not sure what it's going to be, but it is going to be called Cirrus from that trip.
That's the origin of the name, that trip.
That's the origin of the name. From building the Champ, we started with this dream of, we already had an airplane, the Cessna 140, didn't need two, we were going to rebuild the Champ over that first summer, sell it at the end of the summer, and make our first fortune in aviation.
Sure.
That's when reality starts to set in. We could barely afford to buy it, therefore we couldn't really afford to rebuild it. It was fixing things that should have probably been replaced. And instead of 3 months to do, it was 2 years to do. And once we got it flying, it was no showpiece by any extent. But it built that enthusiasm and that drive of, we're going to do something in aviation. So from that point on, we went and decided we're going to buy a kit plane. Now it's 1980. The aviation industry is collapsing upon itself. From 78 to 79, slight decrease in general aviation
And what's
sales.
happening? Why is it collapsing on itself in the 80s?
There were a multitude of reasons. Interest rates were, as don't know if you would remember, but as I remember, you're in the 17 to 20% interest rate.
All right, so 7.5% people should be okay with today.
7.5% is historically not a really bad
Okay,
number.
17% interest rates.
17 to 20 to 22. We had no money. You can imagine what interest rate we would have had to pay.
Sure.
In a situation where, if you're trying to buy a house in 1980, or somebody who actually can afford it, buying an airplane in 1980, and you're paying 20% interest, that becomes a tough nut to sell.
Yeah.
Insurance was skyrocketing through that time. A little bit of what we're going through right now, the perfect storm. High interest rates, high insurance costs. In general aviation, as we look back, maybe the right decision by the major companies, but a clear decision. They stopped focusing heavily on the low end of GA. They weren't making trainers. They weren't updating the 172s, 182s.
Right.
They were relatively stagnant.
I know this because when I learned to fly, I learned in a 1970 something.
Yeah, and it looked exactly like
right.
the 1994 when they came back in, or a Cessna. But they were focusing on building jets. They were driving upscale. The Citation line, comes out on the market in the early 70s. Business-wise, it was probably the right thing to do. A fantastic line of jets started at that point. Piper is building the Cheyenne, focusing on the twin-engine turboprops. Beechcraft, same thing. The King Airline,
Right.
Took over the development and the focus of these companies. The smaller companies that then were focusing on low-end general aviation or entry-level general aviation is fighting all the other headwinds of very expensive development programs, high insurance rate, high interest rates, very difficult time to raise money in a shrinking industry. So 78, the top year for GA, 79 down, 80 half of what it was in 78. 81
Really?
half again, 82.
Wow.
So it falls off a cliff. Now if somebody, let's say companies that were around, Commander or, the Grumman Tiger line. Hey, I got a great idea. I want to invest a whole bunch of money to build a brand new general aviation airplane. The investment community said, hey, I got a better idea for you. No, go do something else.
Right.
So it was that perfect storm. At the same time, the experimental industry was booming. The kit side of the industry. We can build an airplane now relatively easily with the Rutans, the toolless construction process. Then the first really developed kit was the Christian Eagle. Every single thing you need. Stoddard Hamilton comes along with the Glass Air, a composite, pre-molded composite. Glue it together like you're building the model airplane that we all built as kids.
Yeah.
That was coming along. These airplanes are high performance, great flying, many of them, great flying capabilities, unique, fast, short field capability maybe, just all of this innovation.
They were cool.
Going into that. It was cool.
Right.
They were cool. So we went to Oshkosh. It was, I think it was 1981, with $200 in our name to go buy an RV-4.
Okay.
Metal, great kit, fantastic performing airplane. Of course, the RV line. It's a wonderful airplane. We were going to give Van Grunsven our $200 when we saw Tom Hamilton's first class air at
I don't think I know that. So you were going to be RV guys.
We're going to be RV guys. Maybe this plane behind us would be metal today.
I was going to say, that changed the course.
Actually, if it was metal, it wouldn't be sitting here behind us. So we, instead of giving the $200 to Vans, we gave it to Stoddard Hamilton or Tom Hamilton.
I see.
And we bought a kit Glass Air. And that was a really cool airplane. It was composite. My uncle built composite boats, something that we actually thought was cooler than metal.
Yeah.
The right direction to go for a new airplane. So we bought the Glass Air. It was about a year wait for the kit at that time. Drove up to Seattle area where they were building the kits. At that time, they were in basically like a storage room. It's like a garage, rent a garage, a couple of stalls in a garage. They had moved out of what they called the pig farm by then. And they were putting these kits together. And we got there, and it's a small group of people, and got to know Tom Hamilton quite well. And with these guys, we're looking at it and going, well, I'm not sure they're any smarter than we are. And they can do this. Well, I think we can go do this too.
Yeah.
So we bought the kit, then
you bought the kit thinking you were going to learn on that and then do your own thing.
Bought it realizing, maybe solidifying the dream that we can go do this. That this kit, we can go build a kit plane, but we had a different dream of what that airplane should be. So over the years, as I've gotten to know Tom so well, I have learned that he is a hell of a lot smarter than we are. And he has been a great mentor. He was been a great sounding board. Often it's like, Tom, will this work? And it's like, well, probably not. And here's why.
Right.
If you solve these problems, it just, and that's part of this industry. People want to help each other. You can call up somebody and say, I got a problem. How would you solve this? And they give you a new perspective and a new look, and
Well, I've always thought aviation is a small industry, but certainly that's coming from a pilot and training perspective. You're talking about an aircraft manufacturing perspective, even smaller group of guys.
It was smaller. It was the kit side, so much smaller yet. Maybe that very, very personal interaction on the kit end of the business. But few people have I ever met in this industry that would turn you away and say, I don't want to help. Very few.
Well, I don't know where this goes, but we were talking last night about the flying car. I have a passion for the flying car. It's in the Museum of Flight in Seattle, and you know that guy,
Molt Taylor.
I mean, and you called him up because you had a problem on your design, and he was more than willing to help you.
Yeah, so our first design was the VK30 for Jeff Viken, who was one of our first partners, who was an aeronautical engineer, and then Alan and I. So it was VK and three of us.
Oh, there we go.
So that seems like a great place to start, VK30. We had built the Glass Air. We had our 140. We still had our Champ. Discovered that it's probably not sellable. So we still own that. We had the Glass Air and opportunity to still fly my dad's, at this time, 182 RG. And what we wanted in an airplane was very fast, very capable, big, comfortable, driving more towards what would be a mainstream general aviation airplane as far as capability. But we're kids. What do kids really want? Really cool.
Yeah.
It's got to be sexy. It's got to be unique. So we designed an airplane that was very much cutting edge. It was big, 5 seats, pusher because we were looking for maximum performance. Brand new designed 70% laminar flow wings, 40-foot wingspan, 100 gallons of fuel, wanted to be able to go high, far, fast,
right,
carrying a big load. Doesn't every pilot want that?
Yeah.
Also, since we were young, ambitious, full of energy, full of dreams, and also believing we were full of capability, complexity is not an issue. Complexity is fun. Complexity is cool. Making something harder is not a problem. 24 years old. At 24, you can build anything, you can fly anything,
right,
you can design anything. There's no limits. You're invincible. Well, that's how we designed the airplane. And from that, we built a hard to build, hard to maintain, hard to design, hard to fly airplane. But it was cool, it was fast, it could carry a big load, it could go a long, long ways. So it did everything that we wanted it to do. And we weren't trying to make it simple.
Right.
We had a drive system in it, so from the firewall to the prop was 11 feet. So 11 feet of drive system, the engine, 6.5 foot long aluminum composite drive shaft back to a structure, a
11
stub.
feet firewall to prop.
Yeah.
It's a big nose.
Tail.
Tail. Oh, at the end of the aircraft.
Big tail with the prop hanging off the back of the tail. We had a stub housing in the back, which was a short shaft, 18 inches long, tapered roller bearings on both ends. That's where we put a slip ring around that shaft to run the propeller exactly like the slip ring on the engine is. You just port the governor on the engine and ran a tube back to a housing in the back. And
simple.
Port this little shaft, you take all the loads out back there. It was simple, made complete sense. Except a piston engine is a very fast series of pulses. And every time a piston fires, you're putting a pulse into a shaft. The longer the distance between the input of that pulse and the reactionary end of the pulse, meaning the prop, you are creating a twist. And each pulse, there's an input and a rebound. And if that input comes at the same time of a rebound, you get a peak torque and things break. To solve that problem, we turned to Molt Taylor because he had solved it in the Aero car and an airplane he called the Mini Imp, which was also a really cool two-seat pusher.
Okay.
And we called him up and said, how do you take out the torsional resonance? How do we not break things when we start up the engine? And he had a way of taking a clutch from electric motors that run conveyor belts. An electric motor spins up very quickly, but a conveyor belt has to spin up very slowly. So it's a soft start clutch, centrifugal force clutch.
Okay.
Consequently, you set it up and it slips until it gets up to a speed where it, in a sense, locks up, but it's also like a torque limiter. If you ever get that resonance that you hit that point at which something would break, the clutch slips. Very simple idea, very simple process in theory, but a high maintenance item. You know, you're constantly dealing with your clutch, you're constantly tuning the clutch. Again, 25 years old, who cares? You know, that's kind of fun, you know. So, but all of these things made the airplane difficult to sell. So I describe us as we were an unsuccessful kit manufacturer, but we did build the coolest, the most unique, capable airplane. So as an aviation company, we had everything that we needed. We had a highly technical airplane, which taught us things. We learned from it. We learned how to build parts, how to build airplanes, how to design complicated systems. We also learned that simplicity is not a bad thing, it's a good thing.
Right.
So we learned that we need to design in a different direction. But we were so unique that everybody knew of Cirrus. People had seen the airplanes. We were in lots of covers and lots of articles about the airplane. So from that, Cirrus became a well-known company, although we were not selling enough kits to be as successful.
What year are we at right now?
You know, late 88, we introduced the airplane, 89, 90, 91 time frame. And that's when we quickly realized kits is a pretty tough.
How many did you sell of those?
44.
44. Is my understanding there's still two of these VK30s flying around now?
Well, right now, none of them are flying.
Okay.
There are some that are still flyable.
Okay.
When we got into really going in kits is the kit airplane industry is that part of the industry that just kind of keeps on giving. You know, it is a lot of hand-holding, helping somebody build, first of all, a big complicated airplane. So you sell a kit, and then, you know, one person building a kit you can take care of. Now it's 2, 3, 4, and end up with 20, 30 people actively building a kit. You basically need a team of people helping them build it on the phone, answering questions, you know, fixing problems. The other thing we've learned in this industry, you can test, design, test, you know, make mock-ups and then different airplanes and fly them and get everything to where you think this is great, and then you hand it to a customer and
they break it.
Then right away you're saying, you did what with,
Right.
with the airplane?
Been there.
Didn't anticipate that. Okay, now we got to, you know. So yeah, the same thing with the kit industry. The kit industry is like at least in that time, the last true area of freedom in this country. If you could bolt an engine onto a tree stump and go try and fly it, as long as you use aircraft quality bolts bolting that engine onto the stump, the FAA said,
go for it.
Go,
Yeah,
you want to kill yourself, you have the right. So people buy a kit, and it's like, I got a great idea. We're going to cut the whole top of the airplane off so I can put in this 800 horsepower engine. That shouldn't be a problem, should it? Well, yeah, by about 450 horsepower
Right.
problem.
Okay, all right. So at what point, so that you had the kit thing, when did the parachute come? When did the idea for having the cap system?
The idea, it's two-part answer again. As you can see, I can
We got
sometimes
time. Yeah, we're good.
I can run off the mouth here. The idea came in the late 80s, early 90s. Alan met Boris Popoff from BRS, and he was putting parachutes on hang gliders and ultralights at that time, talking about, it should work on certified airplanes. And actually he was working on putting it on a 150 at that time.
Okay.
And I was like, this is a great idea. We're going to stick it on our next design. It came from, in 1985, Alan had a mid-air collision. He was in our parents' 182 RG. It was out of a small GA airport, north and south runway. It was the end of April. Now these are important because in Wisconsin, the end of April.
Damn Cirruses,
Yeah.
I tell you can't get away from these things.
It was evening, late afternoon, let me say, end of April. The sun is exactly west. There was a small Vagabond, Piper Vagabond, no radio, no electrical system, flying straight west into the sun in an airplane that's 40 plus years old. Our speculation is he probably can't see forward. The sun is right in his face. It's not a brand new windscreen. It's probably got some scratches, the glare and all of these things. And he crossed the departure end of the airport. Alan was training for his IFR rating, had just taken off. It had actually just put on the hood when the two airplanes collected each other. The wing of the 182 went through the strut of the Vagabond, immediately taking that wing off. The strut cut off 4 feet of the wing on the 182, just sliced through it. He was able to control the airplane, and on the Cessna they have big, long ailerons and a middle hinge. So it took the aileron off to that middle hinge, but he still had half an aileron on one side and full aileron on the other. So he's able to control the airplane, get it back to the runway. He landed at, I believe these numbers are right, at 140 knots.
Oh my gosh.
At control limit of roll when he touched down. Got out of the airplane, and Alan didn't say aviation is stupid, aviation is dangerous, we shouldn't be allowed to fly, we need more rules or whatever. He got out of the airplane and said, there has to be another way to change aviation to make it safer. People make mistakes. You can't stop people from making mistakes, but we can come up with something that mistakes aren't always deadly. There's got to be something else. On a car, you get to pull over beside the road.
Sure.
In an airplane, you don't get to pull over. You have to deal with the mistake until you land safely on the ground. How do we change that? That point on, started to look for what that could be. When we started on our next design, the SR, it actually would technically be starting on our third design, the SR-20. From day one, it was going to have a parachute.
Well, that's a good point, because in the early days, people would say, well, they put in the parachute because of the spin characteristics, but the parachute was day one addition to the aircraft.
Yep, day one. And when we started the SR-20, I was a ripe old age of, let's see, I must have been 29 years old.
This is the early 90s.
Yeah, I think it was 91, so I'd have been 30 years old when we really started, this is what we're going to go do, and start dreaming of what it could be. And at that point, it's like it's going to have a parachute on the airplane. The only thing is, we thought it would be easy. How hard could it be to put a parachute on an airplane? The Apollo spacecraft came down underneath a parachute.
If NASA can do it, no problem.
Well, the military, they push a tank out the back of an airplane with a parachute. How hard can this be? It can be really, really hard.
Right.
Really hard. So we learned that actually parachutes are point design specific items. From a skydiver, they ask, what do you weigh? Here's your parachute at that weight. We want to design it for an airplane that is going to be flying very, very slow or very fast with one person and no fuel, or 4 people and full fuel.
Right.
The requirements are enormously different. The amount of load on a parachute between pulling it at stall with minimal fuel and one person, and pulling it at cruise speed at gross weight, the load requirements are so vastly different that it's not, gee, this is simple, let's just go put a parachute in the back of the airplane. Yeah, so.
But I mean, we now have hundreds of lives saved, hundreds of deployments of the parachute, or over 100 deployments of the parachute, both on the SR and the SF-50. You guys figured it out.
We did. We did. We figured it out. We figured out how to make it work on a 6,000 pound jet. Now, it is an enormous undertaking, and as Todd Simmons puts it, that every company has that big idea. Parachute on an airplane is a big idea.
Right. Do you think you'll see it on any other aircraft? Do you think other manufacturers will do this?
I'm amazed that they don't. We didn't try to, in the very beginning, try to isolate any ideas. We didn't patent anything. We didn't try to keep it secret how we did it. Our look at aviation, from day one, is a bigger, healthier aviation community is better for all of us. And we never said we want to build the most airplanes. What we always said is we want to build every single airplane we can build. And if somebody can build more, that's fine. We want to build everything we can do. We want the market so big that everybody can build airplanes. Keeping your customer safe is kind of an important piece of business.
Right.
So I'm amazed that new designs come out that don't do it.
Right.
It is hard. It's a lot of testing. Every single installation design is going to be different. You got to go figure it out. There is nothing that's, the simple cookie cutter, I've got a parachute, if I put it here, it's going to work. It's going to have to be tested. Maybe it works, but you got to go find all of those nuances that make it a problem.
I work with Gary Black at Aerista, and I love hearing his stories about bombing the desert, doing your parachute runs. And we went out there for a weekend, and next thing you know, it took a little longer than that.
Yep, the FAA, when we first were going to certify just the canopy, the FAA said you'd have to do 3 successful drops. So we thought, okay, great. We took our parachute, 3 parachutes, and put barrels of sand on a pallet, strapped it together to get the weight we wanted, pushed it out the back of a 123, and that first weekend we bombed the desert 3 times. That's how many parachutes we had. And they come back and go, maybe it's not quite so easy. And as we got better at bombing the desert, if I put it, there's a picture that Gary actually has of the team that was out there doing it, and there was a pile of cans, busted cans behind them. It was, probably 10, 15 barrels, broken.
Right.
And if I remember the number right, it was 34 times we bombed the desert before we had our first successful
canopy open.
Yeah.
Wow.
So as you can imagine, that's a lot of trial and error, a lot of design work, a lot of expense. We're out in Kingman bombing the desert literally with a barrel full of sand, and makes sense that you have to remove the barrel, but we also had to remove the sand because the sand wasn't from that spot in the desert where we were putting it, and then you have to rake it out. So it's a lot of work when you put 4,000 pounds of steel and sand 6 feet into the desert.
Get some interns for that. All right, well, you're talking about the VK30 and the complicated design. We're obviously sitting here in front of the SF50, which represents one of the least complicated or easiest to fly, pilot-friendly things. What's the path from VK30 to SF50 from a design concept?
Realizing quickly that complexity, although may be cool and it may be fun, isn't marketable. Simplicity is far better. Our pusher airplane, the VK30, was very jet-like, so somewhat similar shapes to this. So the jet idea was, in the very beginning, maybe not realistic, saying, this is going to turn into a jet, but always, this is the closest thing to a jet attitude. So Williams International is the builder of the jet engine. Sam Williams, another brilliant designer, brilliant engineer, owned and operated Williams International at that time. Started building jet engines, small jet engines for military applications. The cruise missiles that we were shooting in the first Gulf War, and those were all Sam Williams jet engines. So he got his start making engines that run for a short amount of time and end up in a great big boom.
Okay.
But he realized that he wanted to take that further to maybe an engine that goes someplace and comes home again, and multiple times. So Sam came out with the Williams FJ44, early 90s. It might even been the late 80s when he called us up and said, he's got an engine and it'll fit in the back of a VK30. Would we come out and talk to him about it?
He reached out to you guys. Okay.
So we went over to Pontiac, Michigan, met with Sam, shows us the FJ44, which is about like this. Looked at the VK30 and said, yeah, this is really cool, but no, it won't fit in there. But someday we're going to build an airplane that it will go into.
Right.
Then our path to that was, we have to certify an airplane. We got to get out of the kit industry. We're not going to ever make it as a kit industry. We have to go certify an airplane. So what does any normal, young, ambitious person say is, well, I'm going broke building kits. I got a better idea. Let's certify an airplane and take on Cessna and Beech and Piper.
Right.
And beat them at the same game. That's an easy step.
I love it, man.
So we're marketing the VK30, designing the airplane that is actually the predecessor to this, called the ST50, single turbine 5-seater, a pusher turboprop, similar cabin, at least cabin philosophy, similar to this. It's going to be easy to fly. You know, our first mock-up had just computer screens across the front. We didn't know who would make those computer screens. We weren't completely sure of what they would all do, other than we were going to computerize flying to make it simple.
This is before the SR.
This is before we ever started doing any work on the SR.
Okay.
When we made the decision that we are not going to survive as a kit manufacturer, we had to say, okay, we're going out of business doing what we're doing. We have to change. We either are going to go out of business, I'm going to go work for a bank so I can afford to fly or whatever.
Right.
Or we have to design a very marketable airplane that everybody, you know, that the aviation world wants.
Right.
We chose that path. Now we have a couple of options. Take, in a sense, the concept of the VK30 and turn it into a marketable, sellable, certifiable airplane. This is the airplane that we're known for, the VK30. Pushers, big, comfortable. Or we go the route of maybe a kit or certify a general aviation airplane, and an airplane that at that time I wanted. I couldn't see myself flying around in a jet or even a turboprop. I wanted an inexpensive, simple, by that time I have one child and a wife who was skeptical of flying us around in some of the things that we had available to us
I'm
at
actually
the time.
surprised Blake didn't show up here for breakfast, given our experiences on these trips. But okay.
Well, that was actually Ryan, who was the baby. Blake wasn't there quite yet. So we had the concept of the SR-20. This is what that airplane will be. The concept of growing the VK-30 into the ST-50. That's the next program. Now we have to go out and figure out how to convince somebody to invest in a company that has been in its first decade of life unsuccessful.
Right.
So we started, you know, we're still marketing the VK-30. We're at air shows talking to people, and we were inundated with people who are fascinated by the airplane. And then you go through and you tell them about the airplane, and it's like, oh God, I love it, this is great, but you have to build it. And I was like, what are you, nuts? They're gonna
Right.
build that? You gotta be crazy, I just wanna buy it. And so then we started to change that conversation of, oh, if you just wanna buy it, that means we have to go certify it. To do that, we gotta raise a lot of money, you know, and this kit's not $50,000, you know, this is a $500,000 airplane, you know. It's like, and then I was like, oh, gee, I wouldn't ever invest in this, it's crazy. But we had a guy who then said, oh, well then let's go certify it. Okay, well, we're gonna figure that out. But, you know, to build, and by this time we had lots of drawings of what the ST50 is. Like, you know, to make this truly sellable, you know, we got to make it a turboprop. It's got to be a little bit bigger. You know, and go through the whole thing with them. And our first number is, you know, it's going to take an investment. This is probably a $10 million project, and we wouldn't start unless there was at least $4 million.
Yeah.
Like, okay,
Wow.
let's get started. Oh, then it's like, oh, well, then we probably have to figure out what it really takes to certify an airplane.
Right. Called your bluff.
And this was 91, probably 1991. So Paul Johnston and Pat Waddick take the FARs and they sit down and start going through every single page, every single rule, every single line. How do you design test, certify, build something that gets you through this rule with an airplane that we want to have here in the end. So you don't want to just design an airplane to meet the rules. You'll end up with a shoebox that won't fly.
Right.
So they started going through what it takes on every single rule. And then pretty quickly it's like, well, $10 million isn't going to do it. So you call up the investor and say, yeah, we're going through this. It's not 10 million. It's going to be more like 15 million. Okay. Let's
Wow.
go get 15 million. This process went back and forth until we ended at, I think it's going to be $40 million. And he goes, okay, I think I can get $40 million. And that's where we...
This is a fundraiser or the actual money person?
Yes, to both of those.
Okay.
We had gone way beyond his means by this point. This isn't somebody going, okay, this will be a fun project I can fund now.
Got it.
This is real money, and I got to go raise real money to go get this done. He was from Switzerland, but he was an Israeli. And he decided that the best option forward for this would be to get the money from Israel and build it in Israel. So again, the thinking kind of makes sense. A product like this in Israel is a 100% export product. Israel is not a very big country. You don't need a 300 knot 5-seat turboprop to cross Israel. So it would only be, in a sense, designed, built, produced out of Israel for the export market. Everybody likes the sound of that. You want export products. So the economic development side of in Israel is like, yeah, we're interested in this project. But what makes it interesting is we could build this. It's a new program from scratch. We could put it someplace that we're trying to create development. We're trying to get people to move to, and we're trying to create jobs in a new area. Well, this is 1992 in Israel. Where do you think you want to build? You want to put new jobs. The town chosen was a town called Kiryat Shimona, which is right up at the bottom of the Golan Heights and two-sided by Lebanon. Oh, and they're in a war with Lebanon at this time.
Sure.
So you want to bring people to the border of Lebanon and create jobs. So we're going to build airplanes 3 miles from the Lebanese border at the base of the Golan Heights. If that's where the money comes from, we're going to go build airplanes there.
Unreal.
It is. So we're in Israel and lots of trips over there. And what do you do in the evening when you're done with your business? It's like, well, let's go see where the last Scud missile landed.
That's your evening plans?
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's see it. They sent a Scud missile hit this block over here last week. Let's just go see what it looks like. That's the times that we were going to develop airplanes in Kiryat Shimona. But with that, we got enough funding. The way that it worked is we sold the design to a company in Israel that got the investment. We were to make the initial design, build the prototype, deliver them the prototype and the tooling to build the design, and then had a contract to help with them do the engineering, moving on to get it certified. So we built the prototype.
And this can be certified by the Israeli authority. Okay.
Yeah, which ultimately is, through the U.S. I mean, everything in aviation swings back here, or at least currently still does. So the project was going to be in Israel, and it's an Israeli project. This is our first foray into economic development, money of anything. It's no longer just sweat equity. It's real money coming in for a specific project. The way it was set up, we had $15 million of cash, in a sense, and $30 million matching investment from the economic development side in Israel. So you spend $1 on a project, or let's say you start on a $3 project, you spend $1 and they put in $2. The problem with economic development is it may be great for a known product. It's great for moving a process. It's very, very difficult on something as unique and developmental as what we were trying to do. So we spent about a year laying out all the plans on how this program would work to get the approval that they were in. And then after that, we had the approvals. We spent $1, which ended up being $3, that they would then replace $2 of it. But after you spend the $3, you now have to go back and prove to the government that you did what you said and go through a whole approval process to get the $2 back. We went through the first 15 million relatively quickly. Now everything was going to, it quickly turned into their money to keep the project going. And it is so slow. The approval processes are so inefficient and slow that, you know, you're immediately out of money. Trying to do something, hoping to get reimbursed for what you already did to finish what you're working on. So it was start, stop, start, stop, start, stop. It was quickly no way to run.
Are you living in Israel at this time?
No, we're in Duluth.
Okay.
You know, building the first prototype at that time.
Okay.
Which we did build and did deliver to them and did fly it.
The ST-30.
ST-50.
ST-50.
Single turboprop 5-seater.
Got it.
And then back here in Duluth, we started building the SR-20, which was going to be our own project. So in 1994, we introduced at Oshkosh, we went through a marketing campaign called The Mystery of Hangar X.
Yeah, I remember.
And we were teasing the market that it was a new VK-30, an outgrowth of the VK-30.
I remember the picture with the canvas on top, and you couldn't quite tell the shape. Yeah.
So when we unveiled The Mystery of Hangar X, we had the ST-50 in front, but behind it was the SR-20, which was truly the mystery. You know, nobody knew that that was coming. And that was going to be a very simple fixed gear tractor, 4 seats, fast because it's composite, proper aerodynamics. Again, a MFD in the middle, designed around opening up the cabin as much as possible by, you know, pushing the instrument panel away, moving forward with your hands touch, go to a side stick or a side yoke so you don't have that bar right in front of you. You could lower the panel, and a computer screen in the middle.
I mean, that was a big change from the existing designs that were out there, the Cessnas and the Pipers.
Very revolutionary.
Yeah. And this was 1994.
It was 1994 was the introduction of the 2 mock-ups there. And we flew the ST-50 the end of 94 and the SR-20 in the mock-up, or the prototype in 95.
Okay.
SR-20.
And the first delivery of the SR is 1998?
99.
99.
Certified.
We're gonna have to edit this. I'm getting this all wrong.
We got certification for the SR-20 at the AOPA convention in October of 98. Actually, the same day that Lancer got the...
Same day as Lancer?
Yeah, the Lancer 350 certified.
Well, we were talking about the funding, you know, for the ST-50 came out of Israel. Where did the funding for the SR come out of?
A lot of sweat equity again, you know. But also, you know, we did start raising money. Once we had introduced it, and we were seeing real interest in it. There were a lot of people who still came up and said, this is crazy. Why would I'm not going to play ping pong on the computer screen in the middle. Things like that are stupid. Who needs a parachute? I'm a better pilot than Chuck Yeager. I don't ever need a parachute. That type of attitude we were facing in the beginning. But we still had a lot of interest. A lot of people are going, okay, this makes sense.
Where did you get the confidence? I mean, I came around a little later and it was still, planes don't need parachutes, real pilots don't land with parachutes. This stuff's all gimmicky. Give me my whiz wheel and my paper chart. And, as we sit here, none of that stuff exists in the world. You can't even buy paper charts anymore, right? So how did you have the confidence and the vision to just stay the course and keep doing that?
Well, certainly with the parachute, Alan was in a situation where he'd have used it in a second. So while we are developing the SR-20 and trying to develop the parachute and having problems, and bombing the desert and having extraction problems, just as we're learning each step along the way. And I'd go into Alan's office and say, I'm not sure that we're going to get this done in time. Maybe we should introduce the airplane and the parachute as an option. And then we could retrofit it later, and going through options on how we can get this airplane done before we're all broke and starving.
Right.
Without a parachute. And Alan would go, no parachute, no plane. No way are we going to build without a parachute. This is what the industry needs, and we're going to do it.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, we'll go bomb the desert again.
I mean, but the plane does come out, you start delivering them, and then you guys were relentless in upgrading. We had Garmin 430s and 6-pack, and then Century HSI, then it was the RNAV, and then the Avidyne and the Garmin. I mean, it has been a relentless march of improving the aircraft. At no point does it feel like you sat back and said, okay, let's just stop investing in innovation. Where does that come from?
So in a few areas. While we are designing the SR-20, at that time, we're probably more doing the layout. I now have 2 kids and a wife that is not that enthusiastic about flying in airplanes. Although we took our glass air on our honeymoon, it was great being packed in a teeny little airplane while we're flying around the West for 2 weeks on our honeymoon. Day one, you're uptight. By the end of your honeymoon, it's like, a couple inches here would be nice. So you start to think about, from trips like that, like, if we had a center console more like a car, you want to lean against the side of the airplane more than the shoulder to shoulder with somebody. So that starts the idea of, okay, we're going to push everything out. We don't need to make the airplane really much bigger, but we need to, be against the door, be against the wall more than shoulder to shoulder. That's just natural how people want to be. Put an armrest in, make it more automotive-like. We had a 310, actually our second 310 by this point. And there was a day we're in Baraboo, Wisconsin. No, we're up in Duluth by this time. And we're going down to central Wisconsin to see Patty's folks. And, we could take the 182, we could take the VK-30, but no, that's experimental airplane, and it's actually a company airplane. We could take a 182 RG, comfortable, still nice way to get down there. Patty's going, no, I don't want to take that. It's inexpensive relative to the 310. I was like, okay, well, let's take the 310. Nah, I think I'd still rather drive. So let's see, the 310, we can get down there in about an hour, or we're going to drive for 5 hours. It's big, 2 engines, 6 seats, We can carry anything we want. It's comfortable. It's got de-ice on it. It's, you know, this thing, it's great airplane. It's fast. I'd rather drive. And then it's like, I don't understand. Why do you want to drive? And that's when, you know, Patty's going, well, I don't think you know how to fly it right. You know, like, I'm a great pilot. What do you mean I don't know how to fly it right? Because when we're in the 310, I pay attention to my instruments and my engine, and I don't pay attention to her instruments and her engine. Therefore, I'm not flying it right. I'm only flying half the airplane.
Right.
And she's sitting in the airplane like this, afraid to touch anything. And then I tried to explain, you know, well, you know, I control the engine like this, and all of these instruments over there aren't needed. And she's going, I don't believe you. Why would you put something in an airplane that is not needed?
Right.
Yeah, but they're cool, you know, and in case somebody was flying from that side, you got all the instruments right in front of you, and it's like, I don't buy it. If it's there, it must be needed. And I don't do anything with those instruments. And that's when you're right, they're not needed. Why do we have them in airplanes? And in fact, if we make it more automotive, focus it to the pilot, change the shape of the dash, give more visibility to the passenger, make it clear that they don't need to do anything. They don't have to sit there with their hands in their laps afraid to touch anything. Put the things that they should play with, like the HVAC system, right in front of them.
Right.
You know, so that's where, you know, these ideas of let's get rid of all the stuff that's not needed really started to focus forward. And then, you know, it's actually Mike Van Stagen who can, you know, visualize and then put this stuff together, came back with a mock-up saying, you know, what do you think of this? And I'm like, I love it. You know, that's where we need to go.
Right.
So it's things like, you know, it's all of us flying, you know, Alan and myself and of course Pat Waddick, you know, there's so many people that are aviation enthusiasts in the company. We're all flying. We all know aviation. We all understand it. So when somebody says, you know, why do we do this? You know, you can actually end up with both sides of the argument. Well, this is why we do it, but we don't need to, therefore we could do it this way. And it focuses everything in on the airplane that then came out, the SR-20, did revolutionize the industry.
Well, that's a switch from where you were with the VK-30, right, in terms of being a comfortable, simple aircraft. And you guys have kept marching that. One of the best talks I've ever heard being around Cirrus was Mike Van Stagen's talk at Converge last year about how the design for the, you know, the SF-50 came about in the space. And he was talking about you were walking around with a ruler all the time and measuring stuff. And I'm going to butcher this, so we got to get Mike to get us right. But it said something, you told him, I need it to be this long. And then he nodded and you walked away and he said, no, we're going to keep it this way. And then went out the door.
There were things that, so when we started truly working on the jet, it was, I think it was 2002, might have been 2003. We rented a old gas station with a garage behind a gas station downtown Duluth and put Mike down there to start making mock-ups so we can visualize this and start feeling, you know, what's right, what's big, you know. And we kind of started with the idea of could we take an SR size cabin and turn it into a jet? So that's where it started. And so quickly it's like, well, first of all, there's no engine. So if you got a bigger engine, you need more fuel. You need a bigger wing. If you got a bigger wing, you're in a bigger cabin. You know, it starts growing. And then for CG, jets are longer because the engine is in the back or in the middle. It's not hanging on the front. So you start growing things. When we really came to this size cabin, we're in the mock-up, and Mike built this mock-up and he's showing it off to us, and I'm sitting in the back seat of the mock-up going, this airplane is huge. This is crazy. We don't need all this space. It's just, you know, I'm sitting in the airplane like I am right now with a person my size in the front seat.
Right.
In the flying is like, we could get rid of like a foot and a half of this and make the airplane lighter and less wetted area and less material, less expense, and take a foot out of this airplane. This is crazy. And that's when he's like, yeah, okay. No. And you can't because of CG and other things. But, in the end, when you get into a mock-up, and that's what we learn over time. You get into it once and your first reactions are these things. Was he right on this cabin? Absolutely.
Sure.
I mean, there's no better cabin in the industry.
You got that little bubble shape at the beginning, the seat slides back so the pilot can go right up into the front seat. You don't have to do a yoga move to get into the cockpit. It's beautiful.
Well, and that's, the other thing with this, if you're flying around, this was going to be $1 million airplane in the beginning. Now it's, 3.5, but our concept was $1 million airplane. Well, even at that time, the early 2000s, if you're flying around in $1 million airplane, you're probably not a 25-year-old kid that can climb into anything. More like we are now, a little heavier than we should be, a little stiffer and harder to climb around. I'm at the age now where flying this airplane is what we were designing it for. Getting in and out has to be easy. The operation of the door on a pressurized airplane is rather important. Having the door next to the pilot so the pilot can actually make sure that it's closed properly. Or more importantly, easy to get into, can get everybody into the airplane, the pilot can get in, controls the door, you can get started without suffocating all of us in a tightly sealed cabin for the time it takes to get up and running and the air conditioner on. I do that with the door open.
Right.
And then I just reach over, close the door, I can secure the door, I know it's safe. It was absolutely the perfect design combinations to create the flying experience that we have.
So we were talking about, when this came to be, you said, I had the story wrong. You said you went to the board and they were excited about the airplane, but they weren't able to provide any money.
Right.
So take us from that part of the story.
That's when, we had talked about where the growth path of the company was, where we would grow the SRs, the introduction of the jet, and we didn't have, that first real board meeting about it was when we had a mock-up that you could be in it and you could show somebody. It's not just on paper. We kind of learned our lesson with paper products in our board earlier. So now you can see this. You can climb in and out. And
so you and Dale had Mike making this before you presented.
Yeah. So when it was presented, the mock-up was there, the cabin mock-up. And it's hard to climb in and out of that and not get excited and say, wow, if I could fly in this is really cool. But we were a fast-growing company at the time. Every penny that we made was going into the company, into the SR line, continuing to grow that, to keep developing the SR line at the same time. This was going to be a large investment over and above. And the board basically said, yeah, this is a great product. This is really cool. We'd love to see it someday. But no, we can't afford it. We can't pay for this. Company can't pay for it, and we don't have the investment to do it. So until you figure out how to pay for it, we can't do it.
And this is our capita?
Is our capita at the time. So, you can be very excited. We all know that same feel. You go to a new car dealership. Oh, I love this car. Well, you can't afford it.
Right.
Well, then I'm not going to, that's reality. So that's pretty much what the board was saying. You can't afford it. So it was after that it was, okay, we're going to have to figure out how to afford this airplane. And It was '06 time frame when we realized that we can't afford to do this. The customer is going to have to, we're going to have to figure out how the customer helps pay for this. We did not obviously see '08, '09 recession coming at that time. Nobody did. I mean, the economy was rolling, aviation was going, the company was pumping airplanes out. So the idea was, let's take deposits on the airplane. And we argued over, refundable or non-refundable, and pretty quickly it's like, well, nobody's going to put in a deposit that's not refundable. But if we get real deposits, meaning a substantial deposit, not a $500 hold a position in line, that basically is, in a sense, meaningless. A real deposit, then we can prove to our board, we can prove to the investment community that there are real people out there that have the wherewithal to buy this airplane, that want this airplane, that are going to put their money where their mouth was. So we started taking deposits. The first year that we take deposits, it was right around Thanksgiving time, and we had a bet over how many deposits we could get by Christmas. And I thought at the time was the most realistic, a conservative, this is reality number that I came in, I was probably the lowest, and everybody else, Alan was the most aggressive, saying this. We were all wrong. It was way over where Alan said, this is where we're going to be by Christmas, with nothing to show. We didn't tell anybody what it was, other than we're going to go build a jet.
I mean, I've shared this with you just before on camera, but in '05, we had our first Alaska adventure at the Flight Academy, and Alan came on that with a guy named Peter Code. And Peter was taking delivery of one of your signature edition SR-22, the first turbos that came out. And I was going with him to pick up the plane, and we met Alan for breakfast, and he slid over that check for $100,000. And Alan was like, oh, we're not taking checks yet, slid it back. And they did that back and forth. And he said, oh, I'm going to take this and show the board that we can get deposits. And yeah, it turned out, I mean, everybody wants this thing.
Yep. And then we went through a very, very unique marketing campaign to keep people interested and excited about what we were doing without showing them what we were doing.
I think Russ has let us look here at this little piece that you guys sent out there, and I remember the puzzle pieces and the coasters.
Pieces where it started.
This is pretty cool.
We sent out
the jet by Cirrus.
We sent out a little magnet board and a couple of puzzle pieces, and then every couple of months we would send out a couple more puzzle pieces until the very last puzzle piece was actually the tail. Was the last thing that then people knew that that's what it was going to look like. Until then it was like, we're building a jet, and we didn't give any specs on it. You didn't know much about it other than we were anticipating, we were telling people this is the growth of the SR series. This is your next airplane up. So people's ideas were pretty wild on what that meant, and that we thought we could introduce it at $1 million.
That $1 million, that was the thing. I mean, Eclipse had the $1 million. You guys had the $1 million.
Yep. On paper, and at that time, it made sense. But again, it's like, well, how hard can it be to certify a jet?
Here we are all over again.
And in the end, when we finally got done, the introductory price kept going up, and when we finally sent the first airplanes out the door at that price, the bill of materials was more than the price that we sold the airplane for.
Right.
And that's when it's like, are airplanes expensive? Yeah, they are. They're expensive.
Well, I think those positions got traded and sold, and there's all kinds of shenanigans going on in the market.
Well, yeah, so '08, '09 came along, and we could hardly give an airplane away at that time. the future of the business is this direction. So you cut it down to, I mean, we were down to like 14 people working on the program, trying to survive. You move into pure survival mode. How do you keep the dream alive, keep the company moving, and you don't have any money? Right back into that.
Yeah.
The number of customers that stuck with us is, I think, amazing. I mean, the people started to see what this could be. And in the end, it's like, yeah, it's not going to happen on schedule that you wanted, because, we don't have 100 people working on it. We got 20. Life changed after the recession. The industry shrunk. Everything that we bid out in 2007 for cost, now in 2011 is literally twice. The bill of material was up 100% over that time.
Unreal.
Yeah. And you just keep going through. A lot of customers asked for their money back. Well, we didn't have any money. So yeah, we were doing every shenanigan, right down to begging the person to say, can I send you the money when I get the money? And we're doing what we can to get it and moving it around. I think we communicated well enough that most people said yes. We had a few people that were basically standing at the doorstep saying, no, I want my money tomorrow. And we did what we could to get them their money in 2 days instead of tomorrow, but we kept the company going. We survived through that. We kept the program alive, I should say. We didn't shrink the company down to the point that we cut off our future.
Right.
At the same time, we're going through, obviously the whole country went through the worst recession since the Depression, and we're trying to figure out how to keep things going. And it was the end of 2008 when everything collapsed rather suddenly. Our biggest bank loan, that bank that we had our biggest loans with, went bankrupt. They call our loan overnight. So, now you're in a real hurt.
Right.
You have no money, you just lost your banker, and oh, by the way, they're calling everything, and you have to pay tomorrow.
All right. So, I mean, that's a pretty dark day. How do you get out of that?
Those are dark days. Our financial partner, they owned majority of the company. As you can imagine, they're a financial group that owns lots of different companies. Every single one of their companies is begging for money. So they're sucking wind at the same time, but they were able to negotiate the bank loan down to a position where they could pay it off and buy it, and gave us some breathing room, although that whole loan just switched to somebody else in a sense and stayed on the books. But we survived through it.
Of course. So, you got this design, you've got the deposits, but now you've got to produce the airplane. The work of actually designing and developing and flying. Take me from 2011 to the delivery in 2016.
It was a very, very hard time getting through that. Our financial situation slowly started to improve. Basically sold the company to a company out of China that saved us. And we had been in such survival mode of, you come in on Monday wondering how you're going to be open on Friday. And on Friday, you wonder if you can open again on Monday. So you live through 3 years of literally hand to mouth. We had meetings, with the basically the leadership team of Who needs a paycheck this week? You know, well, I got a house payment. Okay, make sure they have enough for the house payment. But by the way, we're not paying you your salary. We
Right.
can't afford to pay. You know, so that type of survival. We get bought out. One of our very first meetings with our new owners, they came in and said, you know, okay, we want to see your 50-year plan. They're like, 50-year plan? I don't have a plan till Friday. What are you
Right.
talking about, 50-year plan? You know? But that quickly turned from, you know, we aren't in that survival mode anymore. We, you know, show us the plan to ramp this up, that we get the staff back on to finish this airplane now as quick as possible. Show us the plan that gets us into production. Show us what you're going to do next. Show us how in 50 years we have a sustainable business.
Well, it's got to be exciting.
It was very exciting. It was fun. And it's what changed our business. So, you know, we basically just went through technical bankruptcy. You know, we didn't file for bankruptcy, but we didn't have two nickels to rub together. To now, how do I go back to our new owners and say, I've got a plan that we won't go through these things again. And history doesn't show that. Because in the aviation industry, there's basically no company you can look back to and say they've done it. Everybody in aviation has gone bankrupt or been bought, including Cirrus, by somebody with deeper pockets just before you're bankrupt.
Right.
All of us. Everybody. You're either gone or you've
I don't see a lot of
gone
Wright Flyers
bankrupt
around
and-
anymore.
Yeah. You know, so it's kind of a dismal look as you look back at the industry, and I'm thinking, okay, well, how am I going to be here in 50 years? Well, I know I'm going to go bankrupt 4 times in that, and hopefully, you know, somebody recovers again. That's not a good sale. So, but going through this process, looking at an industry that is extremely successful, and a growing industry, and a lot of money in aviation. But the companies that manufacture the airplanes are in and out of bankruptcy over and over again over the history of their process. That's what, you know, going through this, started thinking about, okay, how do we get involved in other things? How do we become more of the entire infrastructure of the industry? We quickly learned that if there's a really good service center and a good FBO and a good support network, we sell airplanes. Where there isn't, if it's a bad service center, we don't sell airplanes. And then you start to figure out, well, they both work on the airplane the same. They both do a really good job as far as maintaining the airplane. But I can't sell an airplane into this area and I sell 10 of them into here.
Right.
That's when you start to realize, well, this person over here, you know, we all face problems. This person over here blames everything on Cirrus. This person over here works with Cirrus. They don't blame Cirrus. You know, they work through the problem.
Yeah.
Well, if you're just blaming Cirrus for every problem, you know, maybe they didn't actually order the part that is now 2 weeks late. What did they tell the customer? Oh, Cirrus didn't sell the part.
Right.
Well, I don't want another Cirrus. You know, that we realized, well, wait, if we're going to take the blame, and we still have shops that are going to fix the airplane the way that they think that you need to fix the airplane, or they're going to train pilots the way they think you need to train pilots. You know, we get all of the downside. When an airplane crashes, it's not Billy Bob trained this pilot that made a mistake. It's like, no, a Cirrus crashed. A Cirrus is in the service center, broken. Cirrus didn't deliver the parts on time. You know, Cirrus. They're like, no, we've got to be part of that. We're going to be part of that entire infrastructure. We're going to take the blame, then we might as well do it. So that changed everything to what we created as Cirrus 360. And it was like, what I wanted is any place the customer looked, Cirrus is the solution. If I need something, I want to go through Cirrus. That doesn't mean Cirrus does it. It means whatever your problem is, you pick up the phone, you call Cirrus, and Cirrus solves that problem. In owning different things, in the whole infrastructure, but Cirrus has to be the solution. Now, we're not there yet. We have learned a tremendous amount over the past decade on getting through that process. Plans change from Cirrus 360 on how it works to something that is better as you learn. But it's the right process. It changed us from a company that designs and builds airplanes to a company that is a lifestyle company. We're not delivering an airplane, we are delivering a new lifestyle. That mentality has gone through the entire company, top to bottom. And it has changed us from a company building lots of airplanes, surviving, to a very, very successful airplane company.
Well, Cirrus has invested, the training videos, the maintenance materials, really, is top notch, leading the industry. I wonder for a second we can talk about some of the design of the airplane. And originally we were talking that this plane was supposed to be a flight level 250 airplane. And then it became a flight level 280 airplane. And then it became a flight level 310 airplane. And who knows where it's going. But can you talk me through how that was with the FAA and your design team and how those changes came about?
Yeah, so the 250 started, first of all, the FAA has a requirement above 250, above 25,000 feet, you need to have 2 pressurization systems, which basically means you need 2 engines. That's how you pressurize an airplane. We looked at that rule and basically said, well, we're GA people. We're replacing all the piston twins that are out there that are no longer being built at all. An entire segment of the industry is basically gone, except for a few trainers and the Baron. The rest of all of the turbo pressurized twins are gone. So we're going to fit into that side of the market. 25,000 feet is probably a good altitude. We don't need to get up to where, obviously the higher you go, the more dangerous things can get. The harder it is to certify, all of these. Let's keep it simple. 25,000 seems like a good altitude. Well, as we started truly learning about jets and the efficiency that you get from altitude, and a lot of looking at the market and where people fly, there's a lot of airplanes from 25 down. And then there's a lot of airplanes of the airliners, and they're at the 34, 30 to 38. They're all in there. All of a sudden it's like, well, at 28, there is nobody at 28.
Right.
A few TBMs, and that's kind of it. Nobody at 28. So he said, well, 28 makes sense. That's where our VSM starts. We'll ask the FAA if we can go up to 28 on one pressurization system. And of course, they pretty quickly said, yeah, that makes sense. You can go to 28.
Okay.
So we certified the airplane to 28. Certainly before we're certified, we're looking at, well, we stopped at 28. Why aren't we asking for 31? We need to get to 31. So the plan was very quickly, we got to go to 31, but we needed to get the airplane done. We needed to get it into production. We needed to get it into the hands of customers. We needed to learn from that, and take everything that we've learned from how to build it, how to design it, how we use it, how customers use it, and keep improving the airplane. So let's get it done. Let's not go for 31 yet. So we went to 28. Now, obviously, you got to go back to the FAA and say, I know the rule says 25. We want to go to 31. People always talk about, how hard it is to work with the FAA. And it is a bureaucracy, and it is hard, and they make you do some things that you don't think are right. But in general, most of the things they ask for make sense. And you know, in the beginning, when we would fight against some of their rules or testing requirements, almost every time you come back and go, oh, I learned something by doing the test the way they wanted it.
Interesting.
Now I understand why he wanted us to test it that way. Okay, you know, so it's not a bunch of bureaucrats that are just trying to make life miserable. So going to 31, again, they kind of looked at the rule and we're going, we don't, at 31,000 feet, we're not going to sit there at 31,000 feet after we lose our pressurization system. The minute that pressurization system shuts off, the airplane is starting down.
Yeah.
So we don't need two pressurization systems. What we need to do is prove that you can get down faster than it can leak. You know, and that you have to show the entire system works. It doesn't, pressurization system shuts off, it doesn't automatically dump the cabin. You know, so it was actually then very quick and easy to say, you're right. You know, we got TBMs, we got Pilatuses, and I think the original Pipers were all certified to 31 before they changed the rule. And they said, you're right, you can, you know, prove to me that you're coming down faster than the airplane leaks. You can go to 31.
So 31 is obviously the G2. G1s are 280. Was that always the plan to get to the G2 quickly, or did Cirrus make that decision to come out the G2 after about 94 serial numbers?
The plan was always to get to G2 as quick as we could. Yeah. I would honestly say that we probably had more time in getting G1s ramped up, and from what we learned, you know, there were things that clearly needed to be fixed
right
on G1s that took more time than we thought they would. And when we ended at 94, the timeline to get to G2s probably was a pretty accurate timeline. We also thought that, you know, we're going to be building, you know, we start the first year, we delivered 4, the next year it was, I don't know, 36, the third year was going to be 100, you know, you have these ideas of how fast you can ramp up, which was not accurate. I mean, we had more to learn we had to learn how much we had to learn.
Sure.
To ramp up. So the number at 94 is probably even sooner than we thought it should have been, because we thought we were going to build more airplanes.
Gotcha.
By that time.
Well, we got about 650 of these planes out there, and we were talking that you've now 5 years out of the company. What do you want to see next on the SF-50 or the 55 or the 60 or whatever it is? What next with this aircraft?
You know, when people always ask me, well, what's coming next?
Right.
And I can honestly say right now, I don't know. I do know what the plans were. I know what the path was. I also know that whatever our path was, you learn, you change, you adapt, so it's not the same path anymore. But the philosophies are all the same. You're going to continue to make the airplane better. What do we all want when you fly any airplane? You always want to go a little bit farther, a little bit faster,
Everyone.
A little bit higher.
Just that much.
Yep. You know, so there's clearly a growth path that we want to keep growing Cirrus into new markets. There's obviously, we've got a 2022 and a Vision Jet. We've left a lot of the market out there. So yes, you know, we're growing down market. We want to grow up market. We want to be there. I want somebody to walk up to their first airplane at every FBO and climb in, and it's a Cirrus, and that's what I'm going to go learn to fly in.
Yeah.
And then when they can afford their next airplane, and as their family grows and as their business changes, as their life changes, I want to have those airplanes going back up the line. And then we all hit the point where it's like, okay, I've been here, I'm at the age where I don't need to travel up here at that speed, at that, I'm now retired. I'm on a fixed income. You want to build back down to, you want to create that. I want somebody to buy their very first Cirrus, and the last airplane they fly in, I want it to be a Cirrus. I used to give a presentation where I'd end it by, what's the true dream of the company? I don't believe that it's realistic to think that every single airplane in the sky is a Cirrus, but I want somebody to walk out and say, oh, that must be a Cirrus going by.
Right.
Even if it's a military jet or a 747 or whatever, I want the first reaction to be, oh, that must be a Cirrus.
Yeah.
I want to, you want to fill that market. And at the same time, we are a lifestyle. I want people to, fly to neat places because they're in a Cirrus. And I want Cirrus to be at the other end of that, greeting them when they get out of the airplane saying, what can I do to help you?
Well, you've been living the Cirrus life even when you were flying 182s, taking the family around on trips from the beginning, and certainly that's a passion of mine is to do that. And before we had a cool marketing name, the Cirrus Life, we were doing trips, and our first Alaska trip was in 05, and Alan came on, and it was kind of more of a bachelor thing. But then in 06, where you and I kind of got to know each other, you came on the trip with Ryan. We were flying around Alaska in the SRs, and yeah, I really think those are a great way to experience the world. I mean, we were flying up glaciers. I remember you guys were around Turnabout Island in southeast Alaska, and you're on the radio, and you go, here's 10 humpback whales over here.
I remember that trip when we were briefing how we're going to fly and make that first leg from Seattle up to Ketchikan, and we just are getting past the tip of Victoria Island, and we're looking down, and it's just really cool. We're at like 8,000 feet, and Ryan's looking down, so he's like, can't we go a little bit lower? Well, yes, we can. And we flew from the tip of
Vancouver
Island. Yeah, Vancouver Island up to Ketchikan at about 500 feet. And it was so much fun. Yeah.
Going right through Grenville Channel, up over, that's one of my favorite flights. We've had the opportunity to share a lot of stuff. We've gone to our Fall Colors trip, our wine country trip. We were formation flying in this very aircraft. We have this beautiful picture on the wall of the Flight Academy over, Denali. It's been an amazing experience. I have this distinct memory though that I had to bring up. We were flying on the European trip, and we were in Germany, and one of our clients could not get the plane hot started. So I tried to hot start, I had 12,000 hours, I'm gonna hot start the airplane. I couldn't get it started. And then of course, here comes you, and you jump in the airplane, and you're like, you get the thing started one turn, and everybody's like, who are you? Of course, Dale knows how to do it. So we get the plane started, we continue on, and then we're in Hertelindy. But about 2 days later, I remember you and I are sitting in chairs like this drinking a Coke because you couldn't get the plane hot started. I felt so good about that, I gotta tell you.
Yeah, it vindicated everybody else on that one.
It happens to even the founders, it happens to.
Yeah. Well, and there again, that's how we learn things. It's not so difficult to hot start the airplane anymore. We learned how to
we got it down now.
We learned how to, make some changes so it should start every time, anytime.
Right. Well, one of my favorite memories is, around the world, and we did it in serial number 7, and it wasn't originally supposed to be an around the world flight. It was taking the plane to Zhuhai, China for an air show, Cirrus owned by a Chinese corporation, and but in trying to get there, the winds were so strong. When I did the bid in the summertime, the winds were a lot lighter, and I screwed up that they were going to be so much stronger in November. So when November came, I had to call Ben Kowalski and tell him I got to go the whole other direction to get to China. And he was like, just get it there, whatever. So I got it there, and then I met you, and we got to fly from China all the way across back to the United States, and it's one of my all-time favorite memories. And it just was a quite a dichotomy in how the experience is in China versus flying in the United States and even the rest of the world as we went around.
Yeah. That trip back is certainly a great memory for me as well. And yeah, I'm not sure how it came up, but somehow the fact that you're flying an airplane back that has 4 seats in it. Is it possible that there's room for one more?
Oh no, that was always the plan. Yeah, no, what a dream. And I, obviously the flying is amazing. And I just remember we were trying to get out of, what was it, Zhuhai, and they just were not letting us out of there. And they wanted to tug the plane over there, and you just kind of took control of the situation. We're like, oh, we're starting right here. We're gonna go.
We had to put it someplace to fuel it. And when we got there in the morning, I didn't taxi it over. I'm not quite sure how it ended up where it did for fueling. But as I recall, we were going to take off at like 10 in the morning. We had to be there at 5 a.m. or something
Right.
to start a debrief to fly from Zhuhai to Macau, which is about 20 miles.
Or an hour in Chinese airspace flying.
Or an hour. And the airplane is there, and it's like, well, you can't start it here. You have to move it over there. And it's like, that's 100 feet away. Why? Well, because that's the start location.
Right.
And I remember the conversation. Okay, well, can you get a tug, and let's go tug it over there? Oh no, we don't have a tug. So how are we supposed to get the airplane from here over to there if we can't start it and we can't tug it? Well, we don't know. That's your problem. And that's when it's like, no, we're going to start it right here. Well, you're not allowed to. Yes, we are. We're going to start it here.
I remember very clearly.
And I think we were gone before anybody realized that we weren't allowed to.
There was about 15 people dumbfounded that we were going to start that airplane. And then, we got in and over to Macau. And, the original problem, Cirrus was going to move it to Macau for us because Zhuhai is a domestic airport. And there was this whole customs problem getting out of a domestic airport. But they didn't have SF-50 in the computer system at Macau, so they couldn't register the landing, and so they were never allowed to depart, which was great because it wouldn't have been a true around-the-world flight for me, so that was good. But, those sort of simple hiccups that you experience where, sorry, you can't come in because we don't have SF-50 in the computer database,
We ended up making it in there.
We did make it in there.
And I remember on that, literally, it's 20 miles. Airport to airport. And we're being vectored around, and we're looking out the front window, and there's a mountain up there in front of us. They're like, maintain heading and altitude. But there's a mountain up there. Maintain heading and altitude. You do realize you have us heading towards a mountain.
Right. Detail work, small things.
Well, you're not completely confident of how the system works relative to what you're used to here.
Right.
Sure enough, they let us climb and turn before we got to the mountain, but...
Oh my goodness. We got to talk about a couple of... So when we went to Sapporo, and we landed, and it is a massive airport. I mean, it's actually 2 airports together to the point that if you put in, your location, it has you at the closed airport. So you got to make sure you start with the right airport. But we landed, and they taxied us. I mean, it felt like forever to the thing, and we were asking to be parked closer, and they were certain that this whole area was going to fill up with airplanes, and we had to be parked over there. And
and we're about a mile from the FBO.
And the next morning, right, we come back out there, and there's nobody there. And then of course we can't get fuel there. We got to move over to the right ramp and everything. I love it. It's great, but it's just a very different experience than we get to fly in the U.S. I mean, it's one of the best ways to appreciate what we have here.
The flying experience is, but the experience of that trip going GA was so cool. Of course, being over the ocean, seeing the volcanoes.
Oh yeah.
First in the Japan area, but in Sapporo when we got there, when we were ready to leave, the winds were against us, so we couldn't actually make the range from there into our stop in Russia. So we had the day off. So let's go visit Sapporo.
That's one of my favorite days.
Well, what do we all know about Sapporo?
That's right.
They make beer. They make beer in Sapporo.
We got to go to the beer factory at 10 a.m.
We got to go to the brewery. And of course, we're 2 tall white American speaking English.
Fit right in.
On a tour with everybody else speaking Japan. And there's one point where they're demonstrating how they put the top of the can together. And of course it's all in Japanese, and she says something and looks around. And Luke, you look at me and goes, I think she just asked for a volunteer. And I'm looking at it like, I don't know why you think that, but maybe. So you raise your hand. Sure enough, they're looking for a volunteer. So you went up there and put the top together. Like,
got to make your own can.
Yep. And like, well, the only person here who has no clue what's going on is the one that volunteered and went up and made
Oh, that was great. Yeah. Then I remember we continued on and went into Sapporo and helped ourselves to some sake and to some sushi, and that was a great trip. And then the winds finally lifted and we flew to Petropavlovsk.
Yeah.
We didn't have our visas, so you're allowed as crew to be there for 24 hours, and we landed at, like, as I remember,
what we thought was 24 hours.
This is true, yeah.
It's
at 2 in the afternoon or something.
Yeah.
And then we were fighting these winds the whole time, and the guy, do you remember Denny Craig? We just happened to be there, and Denny Craig, famous, infamous ferry pilot.
Yeah.
He lands and
he lands just in front of us, coming from Adak, Alaska. So when we get out, we see him getting out of, he was in a King Air, we get out of the Vision jet and we start talking. The first thing he says is, I had such a great flight, tailwind, all the way from Adak, Alaska. It was great. It was, fast flight here. We look at each other. That means we have a headwind all the way to Adak, Alaska. That's going to create a little bit of a problem.
Right, and we asked our handler, we're like, hey, there's a hotel over there, it's 2 o'clock, we've got 24 hours, we'll be out of here by 9 a.m. in the morning, can we stay the night? And it's like, no. And we explained the winds, and I remember this line so clearly. She says, that is your problem, not my problem.
Yeah. She also said, in America, you would kick us out and make us leave anyway. And I'm sitting there going, no, I don't think we would.
Right.
If the pilot is sitting there saying, we can't make our next stop, and our next stop is a little island in Alaska, I don't think we would kick them out and say, you have to go. But that is what they told us. We have to leave.
Right.
And we did.
Well, we got our heads together and we decided there's an Air Force Base, Shemya Air Force Base out there that was 600 miles. And even though I tried to contact about landing, like, we'd rather be in American prison than Russian prison.
Yep.
I think that's probably a good decision.
Yeah. We decided it was better to land at a U.S. base without permission than stay in a Russian base without permission.
I think that proved to be intelligent, yeah. But then, so we depart at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday.
Yeah.
And of course, the cool thing was we landed at 6 p.m. on Thursday. So we actually time traveled, you and I together, so that was pretty cool. Across the international date line. And I've got a landing in my logbook, a takeoff on a Friday and a landing on a Thursday. That's kind of cool. And then, I remember that approach. It was an ILS approach, but it's a 1,500 foot ceiling, about 4 miles, or 1,500 foot decision height, 4 miles away from the threshold. And as I recall, the story gets better with time. But
well, it was very dark, very much nice, night. And it was raining. And we were. There are no other options.
That was it.
We actually landed with a fair amount of fuel.
We did.
After taking off.
Completely legal.
Knowing that we were short, but the winds did favor us by the time we got there. We landed with enough fuel. The only problem is we were still 300 or 400 miles from any other airport. So,
well,
our options were you were going to land here no matter what.
That's the risk of that thing. But I remember we landed in Adak from Russia. I don't know if anybody knows, there's a little bit of a thing going on there. And there was no customs. There was no anything. We got picked up and went to a little townhouse, and I remember there's no restaurant. I mean, I felt so bad. I'm with the CEO of Cirrus, and we're having Cliff Bars in the townhouse in Adak, Alaska.
Yeah, that was funny. They said, well, is there a restaurant? Yeah, there's a restaurant. Could we go there? what, they're open on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Right. It's like some guy's house. He lets you go in his kitchen, cooks for you.
Yeah, like, that's it in Alaska? Yeah, our grocery store is open on Wednesdays. I don't know what the dates were, but it was like, okay, we are not going to be eating.
And we spent that night, and I think I remember it was, they had one magazine, it was like Guns and Ammo or whatever, and we're eating our Cliff Bars, and anyways, we were happy we were there. And then the next morning was one of the most glorious. We took off, and the sun was, we got through Scud, and the light was out on those mountains, and we might throw some pictures of that up here, but that Aleutian chain, stunning.
Yeah.
Absolutely gorgeous.
Well, we landed, our next stop was Cold Harbor, right?
That's right.
And
Cold Bay, maybe.
Cold Bay. We landed there for fuel and went in and talking at the FBO about the little town, and I don't know, town of a few hundred people. And
right.
And you remember there was a Navajo that was getting loaded up with cargo,
right.
And talking about the town, and it's like, well, there's the mayor. She's loading that airplane.
That's so funny. The mayor's doing the ramper at the airport.
Yep.
Loading the Amazon packages. We're like, oh,
Loading
we're back in America. Here we go.
Yep.
Yeah. And then.
But of course, no food there either.
Nope. This is a fast. We were on a 36-hour fast.
Yeah.
And then we took it to Juneau, and that was awesome. And we finally cleared customs in Juneau, and damn you, Atlantic. The guy said to me, do you have any garbage? And I gave him the garbage, and he charged me $1,000 because it was like Russian garbage or something. They had to dispose of it. I actually ended up calling the management. Let's not get into it. But yeah, we were back.
Yeah, we were back. Yep, and customs went probably as smooth as it ever could.
That's right. Yeah, they were just chatting us up.
Yeah.
And then we made it down at night. It was a long day. We made it down to Renton and landed and completed the Around the World. And I remember we were going to land at Boeing. And you said, and I said, do you mind if we go to Renton? And you were like, oh, we got to finish the flight. You're always very, the GA mindset, the doing the Around the World is always very important. And I appreciate that about you.
Yeah, no, that was a great experience. That was fun. Those of us that have never flown over much water, being in the Midwest, crossing Lake Michigan is a big deal.
Right.
When we left Macau, and it's 500 miles to Taiwan.
Yeah.
And you're looking at all of that water, and I'm kind of looking back, okay, we got a raft, and thinking about it. I was amazed how quickly it's like, don't really even think about it.
You get comfortable?
You get comfortable with the idea of flying over. Because we had a lot of water to fly over for the next 2 days. And yeah, very quickly, it's like, it's just water. I have no plans on landing on anything but an airport when there's ground below you. I didn't have any plans of landing anywhere but at an airport when there's water below you.
Yeah, you've built an amazing aircraft, right? It's extremely reliable. That was serial number 7, and we didn't have any issues with that airplane. It was rock solid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is serial 5 behind me, the first C of 8 airplane. And 2 weeks ago, I had a starter switch problem, which is actually the first time that I couldn't make a flight ever in this airplane.
That's your first time, serial number 5.
First time ever. It has never let me down. It actually, maintenance-wise, has been remarkably easy airplane to maintain.
Yeah, that's...
And easy to fly, and very, very enjoyable.
Yeah, I guess coming full circle, we were talking about the first time you saw, an SR on the ramp in 2000 or whatever, and how that made you feel. I was sitting there we videoed you landing today, and you're flying a Vision jet that you built and designed, and started from that dream at age 15 to now. That's pretty full circle. How's that make you feel?
Very proud. Actually, very humble also to see where this came. There's been a lot of problems we had to overcome, and when I think back to when Alan and I together, he was clearly the visionary. He saw where this needed to go. But luckily with him and I, and then Pat Waddick and I going on, it seems like when one of us was up and one was down, we could always, we're never both throwing in the towel at the same time. That you always, you get through the problems. There's times where it's like, we got to throw in the towel. One of us like, nope, we don't. There's one more play here. And that's how we, starting in a barn with blocks of foam, cutting out a shape of an airplane to today, right? Seeing vision jets, and literally, if you go to an airport, you kind of expect to see, if there's airplanes parked outside, you expect to see a Cirrus.
Well, here we are at Carefree, Arizona. There's one outside. Two have taxied by while we're doing this interview. I mean,
yeah,
that's the reality.
Yeah, sitting here in this beautiful hangar, looking out, seeing the runway, the desert landscape. It's hard to beat this. Talking about airplanes.
Yeah, I mean, this is, did you ever, was this what you imagined in your wildest dreams? Or, where did you think you would be when your 15-year-old self looked forward?
That is, we're always asked, did we ever dream of this? And the answer in reality is, yeah, we dreamed of this. We just thought it would be easy.
Right.
Didn't know it would be so hard, didn't know that it would take 50 years. We thought, it'll take, I shouldn't say 50, 40 years, but, we're going to certify that SR-20, and in year 3, we're going to build 1,000 of them. Be on our way to thousands per year. We did end up building thousands of them, just not all in the same year.
Right. Well, I mean, we were talking about it, the list of defunct, failed aircraft companies is long and distinguished, and Cirrus is not among them. I mean, Cirrus is the success story.
Yeah, and I don't think Cirrus ever will be. Cirrus is going to be it. I think it is on such solid footing, going in the right direction. Now, we still have problems, still have things to fix, still have to do things better, but the path is right. I think the team is right. We're going in the right direction. And it's exciting for me now, being completely retired, sitting back and watching.
Yeah, you got catbird seat.
Yeah.
Awesome, Dale. Well, thank you. This has been amazing. I really appreciate taking time. It's they say you should never meet your heroes, and I'm glad that's not true, because you're someone I look up to and respect a ton in the industry, and we've known each other for a long time and been able to share many great adventures and break bread on several continents, and I respect you a ton, and I'm deeply grateful for all you've done, and thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Awesome. I think we got it.